We are now in Unit 2 of Algebra 2. The title is Functions, Relations, and Their Graphs. So our goals in this section 2.1, the title is How Many Outputs? So our goal is, there's 4 of them here, I can define and identify the relationships between a function, a dependent variable, and an independent variable. Also, I can define and compare the difference between a function and a relation. The third thing, I can identify the independent and dependent variables in a function. And I can determine the number of outputs for a real-world problem. All right, let's get started. All right, so if you want to come see me, I have a handout that fits these notes. Otherwise, you can take your own. You can use Apex to find these definitions also. Dependent variable. Okay, well, a dependent variable is a variable whose value depends on the value of another variable, and it's graphed on the y-axis. So in this case right here, the y, this is our dependent variable. You always put the dependent on the y-axis. And so the y value is going to depend on whatever you put in for the x value. So when you're taking these notes, make sure that you underline it's graphed on the y-axis. Okay, and that it's a variable whose value depends on the value of another, so you underline the depends. All right, the next term is independent variable. The independent variable is right here. Okay, it's a variable whose value determines the value of another. So the x value, the input value, is your independent variable, and that's graphed on the x-axis. Okay, so the dependent variable again is a variable whose value depends on the value of another one, and it's graphed on the y. So the y depends on whatever you put in for x. And the independent variable is a variable whose value determines the value of another. So the x, whatever you put in for x, determines what y is. And that's graphed on the x-axis. All right, and the next term is called the input, and as you heard me using that, the input is basically the same as your independent variable. It's a number that is entered into the function. It's called the independent variable. It's the input, or the x value. That's why I have that in red. That being said, then the output is the result of a function. It's the dependent variable. It's your y. So input, independent, x, those are all the same. And output, dependent, and y, those are all one and the same. All right, let's talk about the definition of a relation. A relation is a set of ordered pairs, and I want to add to this that every input has one or more outputs. So if you have this note sheet to follow along, you can graph these with me. There's two sets here. There's set R, which I'm going to do in red, and there's set S, which I'm going to do in green. Okay, if we go ahead and graph these ordered pairs, 1's my input and 5's my output. So this is my input and 5's my output. So I'm going to go to the point 1, 5. Here's my x-axis, my y-axis. So the point 1, 5 is here. Then I'm going to graph the point 2, 7. 2, 7 is here. And the point 3, 7. Okay. Notice here every input, the 1 is paired with 5, the 2 is paired with 7, the 3 is paired with 7. Every input has one output. Then we're going to graph the green relation. 4, 6. So 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is here. 4, 7 is here. And 5, 8 is here. Notice here though the green, that every input, the input 4, has 6 for an output and 7 for an output. Okay, one of these sets is a function and one of these sets isn't. Well, if you look at the definition of a function next, to be a function, and this is key, for every input, there is exactly one output. So if you look at these two sets, for the input of 4, there's 2 outputs, so this is not a function. And if you look at set R, that set, every input is only paired with one output, so that is a function. If you need to pause this at any time to get your notes caught up, please do so. Okay, so a relation is a set of ordered pairs, and every input has one or more outputs. Okay, so here's 2 examples of relations. A relation could also be a line like this. This could be a relation. Okay, it's a set, it's an infinite set of ordered pairs. Okay, so now what's the difference between a relation and a function? Like I said, a function is a rule that tells how one number depends on another. And this is very important. For each input, there is exactly one output. So this function here, y equals 5x, I'll rewrite it above here. If you make a table here, when x is 0, 5 times 0 is 0, y is 0. So the point 0, 0 is part of that function. If x is 1, forgot to put my x and y. If x is 1, y is 5. So the point 1, 5 is on the graph, 1, 2. Okay. If x is 2, y is 10. So 2 10s on the graph. So as you can see, for every input, there's going to be exactly one output number that you get out, and it's actually going to be a continuous line, something like this. So this is a function. Every input, there's exactly one output. It can either look like a graph or it can look like a set of ordered pairs. This is a function up here also. All right, so there's just a lot of key terms. We had independent and dependent variables, dependent and independent. We had input and output, and then we had relation and function. All right, now we're going to talk about the last goal. Determine whether real-world situations are functions or relations. Well, in Apex, there's a key problem they talk about a real-world relation. They talk about something called the catwalk. And if you read it in there, they're in a mine. This is like inside of a mine, and there's like a walkway, like a bridge that the people walk on, the people that are working. And at certain points, at this input point they want to call it, they have support beams. And at that point on the support beam, at this input value, there's not only one, but there's 2 output values where they have to attach them. So they say this would be a real-world example of a relationship, a relation, where this input has more than one output. Okay, some real-world functions. Think about your pay per hour of work. Okay, your pay, and this will be written in the quiz, you'll see stuff like this. Your hours is what we call your input. Okay, and your pay is your output. So in other words, however many hours you work, your pay depends on the hours. So your pay is your dependent variable. So when you write it in this notation, the dependent goes on the outside and the independent goes on the inside. And so like we said, the independent is your x variable and the output would be your y variable. They're one and the same. But depending on the hours, if you work 1 hour, you get 10 bucks an hour. You work 2 hours, you get 20 bucks an hour. So each hour that you work has a different amount of pay. That would be a real world example of a function. All right, that's it. So if you understood what was said and took the notes on the key terms, you should be able to go down to Apex and you should be able to take quiz 2.1.3 on the title is how many outputs.